Soccer podcast interview. My name is Dave Kindle here with Matt Ralph from the Brotherly Game. Matt, hello. How you doing?
Hey, Dave. How's it going?
It's great, man. I'm excited to be here. We're live in person, coming to you from a conference room, and so I'm excited about that. Apologies if you hear any vents or anything like that, but I think we should be good. Thank you for hosting me and having me here.
Yeah, I think we should mention that you're in Pennsylvania.
I'm
not in California.
Yes, very.
We'll
very
have to
true.
do this in California.
Yeah. Hopefully, maybe if you make it out to that San Jose game in September, that would be a lot of fun. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Matt. Like I said, is a writer, podcaster, and editor for the Brotherly Game. If you're watching the YouTube video, please feel free to say hello to us, interact with us as we go along here, or if you're watching in the future, leave a comment, and I'll relay that to Matt, and we'll get back to you. But I think that's everything. I think we're ready to jump into the podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns for me?
No, this is great. I mean, I'm a big fan of the podcast, and I don't really watch a lot on YouTube. Sorry, but I'm a big fan of the podcast, and it's great to sort of get a chance to talk to you. And I know we have very similar interests in terms of just the soccer in general, not just specific leagues or specific teams.
Yep.
So it's I'm looking forward to kind of having a chat about that.
Me too, man. Yeah, so I'm excited. So I'm going to get into it, and then so this will be when the interview actually starts. I'd like to welcome on Matt Ralph, who is writer, podcaster, and managing editor of The Brotherly Game, a blog focused on covering soccer in the Philadelphia region. Matt, welcome to Bros Talking Soccer. How you doing today?
Good. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. We are live in person, so I am back on the East Coast, and Matt is in the Philly area, so I was able to come meet up, and so I'm really excited to do that. Let's talk a little bit about Brotherly Game, and so specifically, how long have you been with The Brotherly Game?
I probably should have looked that up, but it's been a few years now. I was kind of involved in more of just a writing role. I think I initially got kind of roped into it because I'm a big fan of college soccer and lower level soccer, and so that was kind of how I started. And I went to a lot of academy games because I'm at YSC a lot, and so that was kind of how my start came in. And that was probably about 4 years ago. I think I can probably measure it by how old some of the first team players were at the time. Watching Austin Trusty play when he was actually, I guess it's been longer than that because he was about 14 or 15 when I started going to academy games, and then writing some different reports about some of the things. Very different time in terms of youth development in the country, and also in the Philadelphia area. So it's been this is the second season where I've kind of taken more of an active role in managing things, and also started writing a little bit for the MLS website and covering the Union there as well. So this has been my most active year in terms of writing about the Union. I started out kind of more, and I'm still sometimes more interested in writing about the other stuff that's not getting as much coverage. But it's definitely been something that you could ask my wife. She keeps track of my hours. It's a lot, but she checks my computer in the morning to see what time I went to bed at night. But so I mean, it's been really pretty solid, probably for the last 4 or 5 years since I started having children too. So that's
busy times.
Busy times certainly.
So with covering, or you said you took more interest in lower level and college soccer.
Yeah.
Was that before joining the Brotherly Game, or so what drew you to kind of those things?
Yeah, so I got really interested in college soccer when I lived in Louisville. Louisville is a great soccer city. At the time, they only had a college team, the University of Louisville, and some other local colleges as well. But that was really where I really kind of started to get more so into the American game, and that was kind of my entry in that respect, and never lived in a town that had an MLS team. I mean, I've lived in towns that have MLS teams now, but never when I lived there. And so, moving back to the Philadelphia area, to having a team, and then kind of getting more interested in MLS that way, but then still maintaining that interest. I mean, Philadelphia is a great city for soccer, for all levels of soccer, for youth soccer, for college soccer, for adult amateur, as you know, in your family. So it's really kind of, how this is, right? It kind of grows, so you find out more about, what are the college players I like to watch doing in the summer? Oh, they're playing at Reading United, they're playing at Westchester United, and, and sort of just, it kind of grew from there. And then someone tapping me on their shoulder and say, hey, I know you're interested in that. You should write about that more.
Very cool. So then you started as a writer
Yep.
with the Brotherly Game, and you've gotten sort of more involved in, I think, a lot of other areas. So
Mm-hmm.
you touched on it a little bit, but so how did it evolve? Was it more just responsibilities kind of came up, or was it something you actively wanted to get more involved in?
Yeah, I think my background is in journalism in terms of daily newspaper reporting, and out of college I started out in sports, and actually in Oklahoma, and I quickly learned that I did not want to do that for a living. I covered a couple of softball tournaments and track meets and stuff, and actually track meets are great, but I just I was really interested in soccer, and I realized that when I got an assignment to do a story about a kid who had spent some time in Spain from one of the big high schools in the area, and I was like, okay, this is what I want to do, And it wasn't even just about sports. It was like, I want to write stories about what people are doing, and not that you can't do that from a sports writing angle, but I wanted to do more general assignments. So I kind of shifted into writing more of a general assignment. I did cops, I did, you name it, I did it, and then kind of settled into doing more higher education reporting, which was also sort of my entry into college and higher education as well. And so, and I work, my day job is in higher education.
Mm-hmm.
We're at my school right now. I'm taking my lunch break. And so, so that's something where, like I said, that kind of has grown over time, and just my interest in writing and writing from a standpoint of covering stories and going to events and talking to people. I don't get to do that in my day job. And so that was really something that I always, when my wife and I talk about that, so it's like I have this desire to tell stories and to meet people and to share information. And so I think, I've done different things. I've had websites where I've gotten to develop content in other areas. And I've always sort of been one of those people who, they always say, find a niche.
Yeah.
So I've had some different niches over the years. I did a lot with music. I had my own publications for years, even back to when I was 15. And so I was really into doing music, and I was part of the zine culture in the 90s, and writing about punk rock and indie music and stuff. And then
very cool.
So that's so it's always been something where I've had like a kind of a niche that I've pursued. And it's usually the common thread has been things that are undercovered or not, or things that I think are really interesting that people aren't paying enough attention to. So even in my newspaper career, I ended up working as a daily reporter for about seven and a half years for three different papers. I forget. There are a couple papers within the same company, but
got it.
In South Jersey. But one of the things I always loved about that job was writing about something that no one else was writing about, and not because I want everyone to read me as the authority, but just uncovering stories and meeting people, and writing a story about there's a hamburger joint that used to be in South Jersey where the guy made a set number of burgers every day, and once he sold out, he was done. He closed, and if you asked for anything on your burger, he told you to get out, and like stuff like that. So like these kind of like these slice of life stories that a lot of people would say like, well, who cares about that? Well, I have like 10 readers who care about that, and whether they do or not, I care about it. It's interesting. Like, yeah. It's a slice of humanity. It's America. It's culture, and so I think that's always been something that's been interesting to me. And it's been interesting, the transition, because it used to be I could write an article for a newspaper, and the editor would have a certain bias, right? They'd say, "Oh, that's dumb. Nobody cares about that," and I could make a case like, "Well, this is a community-based paper. This is a community-based story," and so you didn't get in those arguments a lot. But now with the internet,
everybody's
advent, right? It's always like, well, how many page views is it getting, and how much attention is on it, and as soccer fans, how often do we hear like, oh, nobody cares about soccer, nobody likes soccer, it's not even a sport. But obviously there's an audience, and there's people who are interested in the game and interested in growing the game, and there's so many stories that are going untold. There's a lot of fighting about soccer. there's also a lot that we don't need to get. I try not to like get into the fights as much as trying to uncover and figure out, like, for myself, like, what is going on, like, who are the people who are trying to like grow the game? What are the ideas that they have? What are the things they're trying out, like things like free play in Minnesota that
I read that article,
yeah,
the interview. That guy's done some really cool things.
Yeah, and stuff like that, where it's like people were trying to, and even just like nonprofits like Starfinder, where they're, I mean, we can't say enough good things about the work that they're doing to reach people in the community through sport, and also to help them get into college and to find a passion and to learn, to hone their skills. And so there's so many stories that are revolving around the game that are I think are worth uncovering and worth spending our time talking about and finding more out about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that really interests me as well. And so, you do cover the Philadelphia Union a decent amount. And so I'm someone who has never been to a match from a, coverage perspective, like a media perspective. Okay, So I'm just curious, like, can you talk us through a day where you're actually in the media box? How early do you get to the stadium? And, I'd just like to know, like, timeline on what you do, what you look for, and all that. So you walk us through like a typical Union match day where you're in the press box.
So I actually don't have a ton of experience with it myself. I've definitely covered games, and I've covered away games, and I've done a lot of different things at a lot of different levels. And I would say that, and I covered the oil spill, the huge oil spill in the Delaware River, and that was such a crazy experience of being one of like 500 reporters covering a story for a week, right, and going to press conferences and the Coast Guard facility and stuff. So I have a lot of experience in just like general coverage. And so I think even going into, I'd never covered professional sports before covering the Union. And so, and I recently covered the Gold Cup, which was an interesting experience for me too. But one of the things I think I tend to approach it as, I don't want to sound negative, but like, I'm just like, I don't necessarily enjoy it. Right. So
it's work.
It's work. Yeah, it's work. I think that's probably what it is. But I think a typical day, you get there early, you kind of find your spot, and you see who else is around. I usually like to try to introduce myself to people that I'm there with. And
what's early? Is it like an hour before? Is it like 20 minutes before kickoff?
I mean, it depends. So I would say for me, an hour is early, but I know for others it's probably a lot longer. I've had to cover games where they've specifically told me, like I've covered Open Cup games where they've specifically told me I need to be there like 2 hours beforehand, and I need to text them to tell them that I've arrived. So I think
why? What's
I don't know.
Oh, okay, all right. I didn't know if there. Yeah.
I mean, I've done some work for for like Opta and for stat gathering and stuff. So
that's cool.
So they kind of require it's a little bit of a different thing. And then if I'm covering for MLS, there's some different expectations versus if I'm covering for Brotherly Game or some other publication. So I've done like some stuff for MPSL, and that's kind of like not as stringent. But in general, you want to. I mean, for me, I feel like I never get there early enough. Like if I could get there 2 hours early, that would be great. But even covering if I go to a college game or an MPSL game or a USL League 2 game or even a USL game, I never feel like I get there early enough because, something pops up on your phone and you're trying to figure that out, or someone, the lineup comes out and there's a scratch in the lineup, a late scratch or something. You're trying to track down that. And, but yeah, generally, I mean, you get there at some point before the game. You kind of want to settle yourself and just sort of, look through any, information that they distribute in terms of rosters and lineups. Obviously, that varies from the level that you're covering. But then it's really the game gets going, and it's for me, it's trying to pay attention as close. It's hard to pay attention because I'm thinking from a standpoint of what am I going to write? What am I going to ask other people to write? And then if someone puts something out that gets, that like the other night, I mean, I was at home during the DC game, but
With Bedoya making his comment.
Yeah,
right?
and that just like blew everything up.
Yeah.
In terms of, okay, who's gonna take that, right? I'm gonna continue doing what I'm doing, but I need someone else to sort of like who isn't necessarily even watching the game to write that story.
Yeah.
And so that's where you kind of get into the mode of managing as well as trying to follow the game, and that's not really like that's kind of a roundabout answer, but I think in general I would say that there's not really anything glamorous about being on that side of things. There's, yes, it's nice that you're able to have I mean, the press box is a good place to watch a game. I will say that because of the elevation, and you can, especially when you're trying to think about, tactical arrangements and how, and like you can kind of see more of the chess pieces moving on the field than if you're sitting in the stands, depending on where you are in the stands. But in general, so the game becomes a process of watching it and looking for different things, and trying to see what maybe some other people are putting out there that they're noticing, or you have a question about something you saw, you kind of check, and then it's I'm a big fan of extending halftime at soccer games. Not when I'm at home, I like start it right away, but when I'm at games, I never think that there's enough halftime. And it's like, because you're like, I can basically do three things at halftime. I can like get a drink, go to the bathroom, and maybe like do one other thing. But I would like to be able to do more at halftime, because especially if something happened in the half and you're trying to,
figure it out.
Like someone gets their fifth yellow card and you're like, oh, how many times did he? But just trying to find information that relates to what you're watching. So it can be kind of stressful, and then it's like the game ends, and when the team you're covering wins, it's really exciting, and you're going to talk to the coach, and the coach is not always happy. I mean, Jim, I mean,
it's pretty even keel.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's rare that he'll say like, I mean, I think the other night was probably one of the few times this season where they won a game, and it was like there was not like, oh well, we didn't play like we should have. Like, I think they essentially executed his game plan. And so sometimes it's like even like a team will play well, but they haven't completely executed the game plan. And so the coach is kind of like, the coach comes out, the first thing, like they're getting off the field, and all these people asking questions like, well, yeah, it was we got the result we wanted, but this and this, we got to work on that this week in training. So, and then it's like trying to, again, it varies with who I'm covering it for, but trying to get the stories in and then get the interviews you need, and then just try to get home before 1 in the morning.
Yeah. And so I always hear this whenever I hear, podcasts or an interview with a journalist, and they're talking about how they have like a whole story written up because they need written up.
Yeah.
Before they, because they need to publish within like a minute or two of the final whistle.
Yeah.
And then there's a late goal or something like that. Is that how you write too? Is that kind of how the whole industry works? Or do you have an outline, and then once the final whistle happens, you can then parse through all of your notes and then put together a coherent article? Or do you wait till after the press conference? How does that all work?
Actually, like, you want me to like share how bad I am at this?
Well, no. I'm just curious.
No. I mean, I think so. For me, and I did not go to journalism school. I got a communications degree in college. I basically didn't learn how to write until I had a desk editor yelling at me every night how bad I was at writing, and so I think for me, like I tend to rely a lot on my brain and my memory. I'm not good at taking notes. I'm really bad at it. I'm really bad at pre-writing stuff. One of my favorite things when I was working for the paper was covering election night. And because you got pizza at the end of the night, that's always fun. But let's be honest. I mean, like, oh, we're getting pizza.
I mean, that works for me too.
But they would always say, okay, make sure because election night is you're just waiting for something. You're basically hanging out, like sitting around waiting, and trying to like write to make suggestions to the sports guys about headlines to write and stuff. Which I used to write, like accidentally write headlines all the time for the sports page, because you'd make a joke about like something that happened in sports and be like, oh, there it is in the paper the next day. But so you just wait all the time, and a lot of people would pre-write it and they'd have essentially their story. But for me, I always had a hard time doing it. And the same thing,
I feel like I would too.
With soccer, is that like if like the other night I had the story basically done at the final whistle because everything had already happened.
Yeah.
Essentially, but the Union, especially this game, like the FC Dallas game I covered in Chester. I mean, there was. It was one of those games where anything you had written before Bedoya scores his goal is basically worthless, right? So, so for me, I tend to one of the things I do is I do like kind of a running. I don't like to do live tweets, but I do kind of that for myself. So then I can come back and then like read what I wrote about what like kind of the key moments in the game. Obviously, like timelines are nice because anything like a goal or cards, but then there's a lot of other stuff within the game you want to kind of make sure that you remember that happened. So when I cover lower level games, like I will sometimes tweet them, not really like really for myself.
Yeah.
Like so I can write the article faster, but generally I kind of wait till the end and then the whole time I'm thinking through like what am I going to write? How are these pieces gonna come together? And then I just like kind of unload on the thing, and then it's like trying to. So like it's funny because when I do this at home, my wife will be like the other night. She's like, "So are you done?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'll be done soon." And like I finished the article 20 minutes ago, but I'm still reading over it over and over again. So, I tend to, and for MLS, I don't do game stories or recaps. I'm doing more like get a story in that night kind of stuff. For Brotherly Game, I mean, I'm fine with anything within the hour of being up. So I know some places where it's like, if you're writing for the AP, it's like the minute that whistle blows, you got to have the story out. So I think it varies through for publication, but I kind of spend a lot of time like poring over it again to try to find like what did I miss and what just sounds terrible or cliche. I mean, it's
makes sense.
Yeah, because cliche is so hard to avoid in sports.
Yeah. Because it's just so ingrained. Like you just hear it so much, and you don't even realize it sometimes that you're doing it.
Or like try to find a different way to say something, especially when the interviews tend to lean that way.
yeah, it's tough getting athletes to say something interesting often. So with the Union, obviously they're having a really good season. I know I'm a big fan, and I tend to skew more on the positive side of things. But how are you feeling about them the rest of the season? Do you think that they'll be able to hold on to staying near the top of the East? How are you feeling about them the rest of this season?
Yeah, it's funny because I've definitely noticed that I've shifted a lot from being a fan. Sometimes I wonder if I am a fan of the team now, just because there's so much goes into doing this, the work that I'm doing, and trying to balance that with my day job and my children and my family and stuff. But one of the things is that like so from an actual game, results, player, roster, all that stuff, like I definitely feel more disconnected from it because I'm writing about it, but from the cultural standpoint, I feel more in touch with it than ever before because I mean my kids, my niece is like my nephew, like I'm so on board with trying to grow the game, and I recognize that the game is at all levels, but just the culture of like being soccer fans and the Union being part of the sports, like the big sports picture in the area, like that's something that I'm probably more passionate about in terms of just me as like, Matt, this corny dad who lives in the suburbs, but like in terms of like covering the team, because it's so much about like trying to figure out what's going on, right? Trying to figure out, and I'm not a big predictor person. I know I love that you guys put yourselves out there with your predictions, but that's just not me. I'm not that type of person. Like I'm not into fantasy sports. I'm very much like a what happened person as opposed to what's gonna happen, and trying to unpack that. So like I'm really like I've really gotten more interested in trying to learn the game and learn for myself, because I did not play it at a high level. I enjoy playing it. I try to play it, but I'm never gonna be a coach. I'm never gonna be someone who can identify formations and tactics the way people who are coaches or who played at a high level can. But I'm learning more and more about the game and more interested in sort of trying to evaluate what's happening, right? And so the season's been really interesting because I was firmly in the camp of this is the fourth place team, right? I'm not convinced that they aren't a fourth place team, but Sunday it's hard not to challenge that notion. Mm-hmm. But so much about and I wrote this last year. Like for me, it was NYCFC game. I was like this team is not good. All these people, whatever. They're gonna fall flat on their face. But hey, I'm on for the ride after that NYCFC game. And one of the things I said, and this is kind of like a thing that I think about, is like those of us who most of us who were alive before MLS became a thing, and who are too young to have remembered the NASL. Our exposure to soccer has been through Europe, either through the Premier League, the Bundesliga, La Liga, and those leagues are so. If a team is good, a team is good, right? If a team is bad, a team is bad. If a team is mid-table, a team is mid-table. And it's all it pretty. I mean,
yeah, like historically speaking, like over the course of years.
Leicester City won. I get it, but that no one happened. Picked that to happen, and we were all waiting for it to fall apart until you got to March, and you're like, they can win this thing, right? This is going to be unbelievable if they do, but it still feels like they're not, right? In MLS. You have people, and this happens all the time. People will say, like, "Oh, they should have beat that team. They're trash." It's like, no, they're not. They're MLS. We don't know what they are. Like what they were. Like Atlanta was terrible to start the season. Are they terrible now? No. New England, they changed their coach. Suddenly, they're a tough team to beat.
Yeah.
LAFC is and I think Kurt even said it. He's like, he said this except for LAFC, like. So like LAFC is like the anti-MLS.
Yeah,
right?
They're in an anomaly.
Right. They're so far above what everybody else is. People can say unequivocally they're going to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And be most likely, barring like something really really terrible happening, they're going to be the top seed.
Yep.
Now beyond that, like, will they win MLS Cup? I don't know. I mean, that's a different season.
Yeah, it's a knockout tournament, especially now that there's only one game.
But we know that they're good, right? We don't know. Like, we know that the Union have played well, but we can't say going against this team that they should beat them at. Like, and even LAFC, like, they go to Vancouver when Vancouver was like terrible, and they don't win in Vancouver. Yeah. So I mean, even that. So that's one of the things where like I kind of cringe a lot, like at the way the fan base is still very much. And I understand it because we're so used to like, if Arsenal's defense is bad, which they usually are, they're going to be bad, right? They're not going to figure it out. Yeah. They're just going to be bad, and you're just going to hope that they score more goals than the other team. In MLS, a bad defense one week is like, 3 clean sheets in a row. Yeah. Based on because there's so much travel, there's so many unpredictable things. So like Connor Casey comes to Philadelphia with Colorado, and everyone's like, oh, this is an easy 3 points. It's like, no, it's not. Yeah. It's not an easy 3 points. They've had a change in their manager, a manager who understands this organization inside and out, and they came to play, right? Like, should the Union have won? Yes, but again, it's MLS, so that's where I think it's it becomes this kind of thing. That's a long-winded answer to say, I think this team is. I mean, they're absolutely a playoff team. It's been really fun to cover them, minus their impersonation of 2016 or 2015 Union and those 2 road games that they got beat. Again, an MLS thing that happens.
Yeah.
You fly to. I mean, the Salt Lake thing. I was like, whether it's 1-0 or 6-0, they're not winning this game, right?
It felt that way.
I mean, at altitude, you're just not winning that game. The Montreal game, I think, was a little more like that. Was, I think, a real one of those games where we're like, okay, are we
falling? Is this slipping in? Yeah.
And then the playoffs, we just don't know. But the thing that I'm excited about as a Union fan is that we are in a position to clinch a Champions League berth.
That's what I'm really excited about too. That's the thing. I don't think they're going to win MLS Cup.
People aren't saying this enough. Is that we've had this situation where we've played this 2-front. We've had this like relatively mediocre roster playing 2 competitions for now. They made the Open Cup final 3 times, right?
Yep.
And this year they got trounced out of. They got bounced out of that competition early. I love the U.S. Open Cup up until I loved the first few rounds, and then I basically stopped loving it when the Union are no longer in it. I'm not gonna lie. I love the competition though. I love what it represents. I just want to see more growth in soccer, that it becomes more of a thing that a USL team could win it. And I know we're getting there. We're getting closer every year. I mean, New Mexico United and St. Louis FC were both like great this year, and FC Cincinnati last year. But the fact that they're not like having the focus. I mean, could you imagine them without Montero, with some of the injuries, trying to also be playing in the Open Cup right now? It would be a disaster for this team, I think. So if they can manage to get first place and get in the Champions League without having to put us through another, like, will they or won't they win the Open Cup final because we want to go to Champions League, that will be a huge success.
I agree.
For this team. I don't think they're going to win MLS Cup. I don't. I think they're putting together the ingredients of a potential MLS Cup winner. Again, it's MLS though, so I mean, you sort of take that how you want to take that. But I think that there's a lot of things they're doing that are positive, and that that I think are reasons to be optimistic, if not cautiously optimistic. I mean, I'm never one of those people who's like, oh, the Union they're the best, or they're great, or the Union they're the worst, and because I can't live like that.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I try to skew a little bit more positive in my thinking, but I'm not naive to think.
Right.
I try to be realistic and just hope more for the best. But I'm with you. I think I don't have expectations that they're going to win MLS Cup. Who knows what can happen in the playoffs? But I really would be so excited if they can hang on to first in the East and qualify for the Champions League, because it comes with extra allocation money. Who knows what's going to happen with the salary cap next year with the CBA? I mean, it would be a really cool thing for them.
And playing a competitive game in another country would be.
Yeah, I'd be so excited.
I mean, I've been priming that pump for a few years now with my wife. Like, we're gonna travel to wherever.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
I didn't think about that. When they play their first game. I mean, they've played out of the country, but their first competitive game, right? Because they had a preseason in
Mexico, right? Wasn't that under like Novak?
Yeah,
Didn't they go down
they went. They did a couple trips under Novak.
Yeah. Okay. And so we touched a little bit on some of the Union sort of fan culture, and I know this is a conversation we've had off air, via different platforms, but a lot of times MLS is really catering towards like the urban crowd, and they want to get the young professionals and attract that crowd, and can oftentimes sort of alienate a suburban fan base and things like that. And our camera, apologies on YouTube, this thing keeps going in and out of focus here. But for anyone listening to the podcast,
maybe I'm out of focus.
You can still, there we are. We're back clear now.
Woody Allen reference. Maybe I'm the one out of focus.
Yeah. I don't, that one goes over my head, but okay. Hopefully listeners get that one. Apologies. But so I wanted to talk about this a little bit. And I know, when I lived in Philly, I was coming from the suburbs. I know you live in the suburbs with a family. And, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just kind of talk through how you feel, when people complain online and just sort of, talk about some of the things that we've talked about. And so.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have a interesting perspective just because like I said, I've kind of transitioned more from being the fan, even though I am a fan. It's a kind of a weird relationship that I have with the team now. But I have a wife who's not interested in soccer, who's not interested in sports, thinks it's all kind of silly or whatever. Who's going, by the way, is going to be the hugest soccer fan in the world when our son actually starts playing competitively. And I've told her, I've reminded her, like, you're going to be at every single one of these games, and you're going to be loud, and you're going to love it. And she goes to games. I mean, she's not, she's not anti. It's just not like something she enjoys or understands or like really like, it doesn't. So I tend to see things through her perspective, and we had some rather uncomfortable situations in the River End where she was, yelled at, like specifically called out for not cheering enough, and so that was kind of a weird thing. So that's kind of my perspective as someone who kind of loves and hates the team and loves and hates the culture. I'm not a Philly sports fan because I'm not really a big sports fan in general in terms of following. I kind of, soccer kind of is my life in terms of being a fan of things. But so I'm, I kind of came to the Philadelphia area already a Cubs fan, and I'm definitely someone that people hate in terms of like I root for teams in different communities. I was born in Kansas, so I'm a Jayhawk fan. So I'm not like I'm not a Philly sports guy. So for me, it's the Union. Like I'm 1 for 5. So that's my perspective, and I live about 10 miles from South Philly, and I live 11 miles from Chester, and I live in the suburbs, and I complain about public transportation because it takes a really long time for me to get places if I don't drive my car and pay lots of money to park. Yeah. So that's my perspective, and I'm a dad. I'm someone who I'm really interested in growing the game from birth. I'm like Crozer Keystone is doing this thing with the Union where they're giving out onesies. There were 3 more babies born on Sunday.
Oh yeah, I saw this.
So like when babies that are born in their hospitals on rivalry game days, they get onesies, and I'm still waiting for someone to like complain about a newborn wearing Philly born when they weren't technically born in Philly, but I'm just waiting for that to happen because you're not Philly unless you are in Philly.
Yeah,
proper, right?
Yeah,
and I'm not Philly anyway because I'm from Kansas originally, and I consider myself more Midwestern, but I definitely consider where we are right now, Philly, the Philly metro area.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of one of the things my perspective is like when people complain about kids being at games, when people complain about, people who are like not the much maligned soccer moms. I take umbrage to that because I see soccer as not being that. Like I see soccer as being, the kid who grows up in the game, who's waving flags and who's, who is like bought into the culture. And I see, I was at New York City NYCFC away game one time, and I was talking to some Union fans who did not meet any of the like definition you would think of as a typical Union fan. I mean, they were old enough to be my parents. They didn't dress in a certain way that made them seem like they were urban, but they were like kind of normal people, like my parents who probably live in a house with an in-ground pool or whatever, and they were so fun to talk to and so into the Union and so all about going to New York City for the day. And to me, and I have a friend who's a pastor, who is a firefighter, who is in his 60s, and he's been a Union fan from the get-go. And he pastors a small church. So like, I meet people all the time who don't fit that demographic, who are passionate and who are huge fans of the team and huge fans of soccer. And then when I hear people say like, well, we need to have, and I don't disagree with the notion that the sport needs to grow in the inner city, because it does. Like that's one of the areas where we need to do way more than we're doing in terms of developing the game, in terms of, gaining new fans. But to me, the only difference between this idea of an urban professional and a professional who lives elsewhere is their zip code, right? So if we're talking about reaching, like, I think Chester is a place where the game really needs to grow. That's not urban professionals, it's a small city. But so for me, like, I just really see, and I love the idea that one day we'll have a team in the city, and everybody from the entire region will rally around that team. But that's not where we're at. And I think in the meantime, it's important to just grow the sport everywhere, to probably put more energy into, like I said, into growing the game at the youth level in the city, because it is such part of it is like, you don't have fans of soccer in the city because they don't grow up playing it, right? I mean, in the areas that they do, they're fans of soccer, and maybe they're not fans of the Union because the Union isn't accessible to them. So I for me, it's like, it's not so much like a disagreement as a, hey, we're here too,
Yeah, and I know this is something that's kind of near to my heart, because I've been a Sons of Ben member since 2007. Never once sat in the River End,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more because I feel like you have to be a certain type of fan. And it's not, I am an enormous fan, but I'm not someone who is overly negative. I don't like chanting about the other team, and I feel like you're pressured into insulting other teams and things like that. And it's just not who I am, and I've always struggled with that, because I have probably 20 to 30 different Sons of Ben scarves. I've been a member since 2007, but I almost am sometimes embarrassed to say it, because I feel like I'll either be not vilified, but upset at from true Sons of Ben who are in the River End the whole time, and they're going to say, oh, he's not real, he's never been there. And then from the other side, they have a certain reputation, and people associate me being in the Sons of Ben with being one of the Philly assholes, right? The Negadelphians and things like that. And so for me, I'm always stuck in this in-between sort of place, because I love the team. I love what the organization does, the Sons of Ben, what they do in the community and all that. But
that's great.
I don't always support the way that, the hardcore ultras, which they're trying to mimic, European soccer culture kind of do. And so, I don't know, I always like to have these conversations and discussions, because I feel like people, you can support however you want to support, and you don't always feel like you have to be, stuck into this pigeonhole. So I don't know. I feel like
and I think it's the nature of, like, this idea of, like, how telling people how they should be a fan.
Yeah.
And I think it makes sense that you have a supporter section, and you police that, and the idea is that you have just like everyone with one voice, and it's loud, and it's a little obnoxious because it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I don't have an issue with that. Where I have an issue is when people say that we're like, those who aren't that are somehow less than or a problem. Like the problem of the Union is that there's too many like horny dads like me going to the games and supporting the team. And like, I definitely think diversity is a huge issue. Like, there's too many people who look like us that are fans. Not too many. I'm saying, I'll correct myself. There should be way more people who look like us, fans of this team. But there should be way more people who look like everybody who lives in this region.
Yeah.
like whatever the demographic is, there's not enough people who are fans of the Union and going to games. And so, so the idea that like there's too many like there's too many soccer moms, or there's like maybe in the percentage, like that's true, because you're like, oh, this is a drag. Like, why are there so many of this type of people, but not enough of, the other representations? But I guess it's kind of like a thing where it's like, you could argue that, well, the reason that people who are more diverse aren't coming is because they're turned off or afraid. And I hear that, and I want to be sensitive to that idea that like marginalized communities are maybe resistant to like being in an environment where there's maybe it feels like, or maybe it is, I don't know. I can't speak for people's experiences, so I want to be sensitive to that, but at the same time, I feel like it needs to be inclusive of all people.
Agreed.
And everyone needs to feel welcome. And I feel like that's an area where soccer has an opportunity, particularly soccer in Chester, because of the nature of the community that's there and the rich history and diversity of that community. In spite of all the difficulties that exist there, the difficulties they have in government and just the poverty and the crime and the drugs and stuff. But I think there's an opportunity to make the Union more representative of our region, more representative of marginalized people, of minority groups who are drawn to soccer. I think there's an opportunity there, and I think the Union has missed out on that opportunity for a number of reasons. And so I want to see more diversity. I want to see more people in the city at a young age playing the game. I want to see more people feeling welcome at the games and being welcomed into the culture, and seeing that they have a team in their backyard they can support, as opposed to only supporting a team in another country or another part of the world. But at the same time, I feel like part of the way we do that is we do that all together, all of us doing our part to grow the game, to teach our children, because I focus on children because my two favorite people other than my wife are my kids, and so I want to see them grow up in a diverse culture where soccer is like an important thing and a sport that they enjoy, whether they have that choice. But like, I want to see them kind of grow up and experience a more diverse culture around soccer in this country, and one that's more inclusive of more people, and that they see people who aren't just from the suburbs who make it to the MLS. They see people who came from all over. From you see some of the best players in the world who started playing the game on the street, and I think that's something that I'm interested in and I'm passionate about. And again, like I'm going to write about that. I don't need to be front and center, and I don't need, because I thought about like, oh, it'd be cool if we had like a family sports group, but that's not really where I want to be. But I do think our children are an important part of growing the game and of growing the team and the sport in the region. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very well said. So steering the conversation a little bit back more towards Brotherly Game.
Yeah.
You also do podcasts associated with that, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of still trying to get that going. But the idea is that, going to talk to many talking. I've done 3 episodes. I just dropped like a kind of a special one about a young man who's fighting for his life right now with cancer. And his name's Daniel Yala. And you can check that out. It's the path. It's on if you search Brotherly Game on podcasts. But the idea is to sort of I meet a lot of people, or I hear about a lot of people who have interesting stories of how the game is kind of taken in different places, and just different things that I would maybe not necessarily want like write a story about, but that I want sort of talk to them and hear their story and do a little bit of that of sharing how soccer brings people together and how soccer is a global game, that soccer is in all corners of the world, and and a little bit about youth development and how the different paths that are developing for people to go overseas, to go different places to pursue a professional career. And so that's kind of the idea, is just to hear from it's not just fans, players, coaches, people who are who have something to say about where soccer has taken them in their life and the journey that they've traveled because of it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something really interesting. I know I've listened to at least 2 or 3 of them. So did you just drop the one you just dropped? Is that your 4th one, or is that your 3rd
that was the 4th one.
Okay,
yeah.
so I think I've listened to all 3 of them. And that's something, I mean, we're kind of trying to do a similar thing here,
Yeah.
where we don't, I want to talk to all different kinds of people involved in the beautiful game. And so I always find it interesting. And so I really enjoy your podcast. And I want to circle back. I have 1 or 2 more questions before we wrap up here. You mentioned this earlier, and it's just something that I find particularly interesting coming from my background, specifically with numbers. But you said you did some stuff for Opta while you were watching games. So what's that like? Like, how are you?
I don't like it. It's really stressful.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're watching for Opta, are you supposed to get every single statistic that happened, or are you only watching for like crosses or like passes?
Yeah, so I've never done the advanced statistics.
Okay, so what were you doing?
I've basically, like, for Open Cup games, I've done really what you see on like ESPN or something, where it's like the main things that happen, like goals, assists, substitutions, cautions, when the game starts, when the half starts, when the half ends, when the players enter. Just a lot of the like main things that if you were just following along on the feed, you'd see. Really, it's more of the public-facing stuff that you would see, not as much of the advanced statistics. I went through some of the training a couple years ago for some of that, and I was like, I don't think I could do this. This is way too. I mean, it's stressful just doing those things.
Yeah.
For me, because I'm trying to watch a game, and so So that it's super interesting. And then so like I said, I kind of went down that path, and I was like, I don't know if I'm the right person for this. I had a job in college where I did inventory of stores, and it was kind of similar to that, where you go to a Lowe's and you're there all night and you're counting fasteners.
My previous life, I was in audit, so
okay.
Like
there's like
not fun. Yeah,
842 fasteners in this aisle at Lowe's. You're one of 400 people going to the store for, and you have like a little thing on your side.
Yep. You count.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes sense to me. And then you also touched on you weren't really kind of like into playing soccer growing up. What got you really like into the sport, at least from a spectator perspective? Were you always passionate about watching it? Or?
Yeah. So I did play. I played up until 8th. I played. I just never played well. I never learned how to play. So I basically had people's dads, the rec league thing, and so and I grew up in most of my years of playing youth soccer would have been in New Jersey, and it was just a very different time for the game. I feel like 5 years ago was a very different time for the game. I'm jealous of my son who gets to basically play from the time he can walk and until as long as he wants to play it. Hopefully he'll be playing when I'm gone. So I think for me the big I was always really interested in the sport. I was mostly a baseball guy. I played a lot of baseball, and like I said, I'm a Cubs fan. Lifelong Cubs fan. Well, since '84, so that was like 6 at the time. But so always really into baseball. My dad is like a junkie. I mean, I've been to 40-some different Major League Baseball stadiums, 30-some minor league baseball stadiums. So that was like my upbringing was baseball, and but I loved playing soccer. And when from the mid '80s to tonight to the mid 90s. So my entire elementary school years, there was no professional league. And then the professional league started back up in 96 when I was in high school. And I put some in. I remember when seeing the logos, and it was so exciting. I thought they were just amazing at the time. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's kind of embarrassing. But like trying to like draw them in my notebook and stuff, the Metro Stars was impossible because the way the font was just so funky. But and I was just, this is so cool. But of course, there's no team in our area, so there used to be like they'd have like a game of the week, and I would always try to watch it, but I just had I had so little rooting interest. It was hard to really invest myself in it, and I picked the Crew because I thought the logo was cool in the mid 90s, and so I was a Crew fan. What did that mean for a kid living in New Jersey? And
I went through a similar thing where I was I think a little bit younger than you, but again I picked DC United, but because they were geographically probably the closest team. But I never really had a serious interest in MLS. And then right around when Fox Soccer started picking everything up with the Premier League, then I started to follow the Premier League. And then that was right around when I found out about the Sons of Ben. And so I joined them, and then I went all in on MLS in 2010. But
and so for me, I studied abroad in 1998 in London, and I didn't study at a college. We had professors who would teach classes, essentially adjuncts. And we had an adjunct who had, she was pretty well connected in the theater community, so she knew like, important people and stuff. And she took us to a game at Highbury to see Arsenal play Southampton, I believe. I went there a couple times. I think it was Southampton or Everton. Southampton, one of those. And we had like seats right. We were 4 rows from the field.
That's awesome.
And Dennis Bergkamp was playing, and all it took. So at first I was like, why is everyone cheering this guy? He looks old, I feel like Dennis Bergkamp looked old when he was super young. He was just like this type of player, like Aaron Robin, like that guy. Like, he looked like he was 40 when he was like 15, probably. But there's certain guys like and it's such a different experience than growing up in American sports, where because at the time I didn't have any reference point beyond like watching a couple games on TV of MLS for really anything that was going on from a standpoint of like the little level of soccer that was being played. And so and at the time it was like even my high school team, it was like they're athletes. It was just another sport that athletic people played. And so that's why the game looked the way it did. It was like big, strong, fast dudes kicking the ball in the air and bouncing around like a ping pong ball. And so when you see a Dennis Bergkamp take a ball and not bounce it back up in the air, like back to where it came from or the other way down the field, you see that touch, and then you see him turn with the ball. It's like, this is a different game. This is beautiful, right? And so I think I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the experience of getting off the tube and walking to the game, and the voices chanting and everybody. There's no supporter section. The whole thing is a supporter section. And so, and Highbury was so small, and I feel like it had a lot of the qualities like that I always liked in like small, like Major League Baseball stadiums, that like Wrigley Field was my favorite. And to me, like that, like Highbury was Wrigley Field in England for me. And so, I always say like I didn't choose Arsenal. They basically my professor chose Arsenal for me. And then just became really just, I became so passionate about that aspect of the game that I kind of rekindled my like enjoyment of playing. And so I would go to find games at parks and just get the living daylights beat out of me by these people that like were probably not even that good. But it's England, right? It's London. So like, the guys who aren't even good are still, light years ahead of us. And then came back to the US, and of course there's nothing at the time. And back to MLS is playing games on Thursday night or something.
And I remember those.
Watching the Houston Dynamo or something. And I feel like the Houston Dynamo was on a lot for some reason. I don't know why. And then you'd watch Champions League final, and I remember watching. I'd always put games on in the newsroom at night, and started to develop some other guys in the newspaper started like kind of being, oh, that's cool, and met some people there that were also interested in soccer. So and then the team came, and I was not living here at the time, but then when I moved back, it was like moved. I didn't intentionally, but I discovered when I moved that I was 10 minutes from the stadium. And so that's when I really kind of got into the American game in that sense. And then, like I said, I was already into college and certainly have become even more and more interested in just the different levels of the sport.
Very cool. So that's an awesome story. And, it's just cool that you got to go see Arsenal back, Wenger was there at Highbury. I mean, that's like old school. So that's really cool.
I mean, Nicholas Anelka was like a 16-year-old.
Oh man, that is a name from the past. That's so cool.
Emmanuel Petit played that. Freddie Ljungberg.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just like that team was so many. Patrick Vieira was on that team. So then I also got to see that Man U team with Beckham and all those guys and Scholes and stuff against Tottenham at Hotspur Lane, and I didn't know at the time I wasn't supposed to like Tottenham, so I was rooting for Tottenham that day. But
that's all right.
I just knew I didn't like Man U.
Yeah,
I knew that before. I didn't have to go to England to find out that I didn't like Manchester United. So
that's
the Yankees of
exactly
of soccer.
Absolutely. And so before we wrap up here, is there anything we didn't get to talk about that you wanted to talk about?
I'm not really. I mean, there's a whole other. I mean, the lower level of soccer I think is super fascinating. I think there's some really awesome things happening in Philly with the Unity Cup, with the bid for the World Cup. With there's I think college soccer is still viable. I think as a level of play, maybe its influence on MLS is going to decrease and possibly get to a place where it's fairly recognizable, but it's still like something to celebrate and something that's cool that we have so many quality programs here in the Philadelphia area. I mean, Westchester is one that I'm really excited about. I mean, it made the national championship. I'm interested to see how Michael Ben can build on that and continue to grow that program and get to the point where maybe they'll be like baseball winning College World Series and at Westchester. And so I'm really just excited about the game in general. I'm excited about the women's game as well. Penn women's team was outstanding last year. Looking to see if they can win an Ivy League title this year. Unfortunately, for our college teams, it's really challenging for them to get into NCAA tournament. Penn shared the Ivy League title last year, but there's only one team that can get the automatic bid. So sharing a title doesn't get you into the tournament. So I'm interested to see how they kind of come back this year. I'm interested to see what's happening at Temple and the program there. That they've completely rebuilt that program. Villanova, the men's side is fully funded. The women's side is going to play the defending national champions in September, Florida State. And actually both men's and women's national champions are coming to Philadelphia on Sunday and Monday of that week. Villanova will be at Chester playing Maryland, and then the next day, or maybe it's the other way around, I forget, Florida State will come to town. So just really excited about college season starting back up, really excited about the academy, some of the stuff that's happening there. Well, maybe not as excited about the academy right now. A little, we'll see, right? I mean, I think the Union have some really interesting players coming in, but there's also a lot of just a lot of stuff that's happening at that level, with the tiering of the academy system.
Oh yeah, that's more U.S. soccer.
Yeah, and so I mean, and those issues, we can not get involved in the arguments all we want, but the fact of the matter is that the stuff with U.S. soccer continues to be a huge problem, and it affects every level of soccer. And I'm no expert on it, and I'm not gonna like spout off about conspiracy theories or, I don't have ideas myself about how to change it. But I feel like it continues to be this huge problem. Yeah. The lawsuits, the fighting, that's the problem in the history of our sport in this country is that every time there's been momentum, every time there's been positive, there's been some lawsuit or some argument or someone trying to like basically keep other people out or it's so frustrating.
Oh yeah.
To see that and to see that there's still so much that has to be done to grow the game, that there's still just not enough people who like soccer and there's not enough people to support. Yes, there's more than ever before, but to really have a robust system with multiple levels, whether they're promoting or relegating or not, just to have a robust system where there's multiple opportunities for young people to pursue soccer, both here and abroad. We have a long way to go, and we have a long way to go to build support and a culture around the different levels of soccer. But there's definitely positive things happening, and I'm kind of a believer that that whatever happens to the top level is naturally going to impact in positive ways the other level. However, when your federation is doing things that look really questionable or just like, whatever the motive is, money's always a motive, then when they're actively doing things, it's like, why aren't you doing more to support why aren't you doing more to do this or that? And that's where it's like, you recognize it more.
Yeah, it's a problem.
It's a huge conversation, but like it's the U.S. Open Cup is one area. Just having all those games on ESPN Plus was a huge win this year, but still, not having. I went on a rant recently about like gridiron. I hate gridiron lines on fields. I hate the fact that our high school championships are played on a football field in Hershey, an half-empty stadium. I want to see more. I want to see soccer being played on soccer fields and stadiums that are suitable for the crowd that shows up, and I want to see so much. But I could talk we can talk all day about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to, but I want to keep it for listeners and viewers. I think you touched on, the question that I usually leave people with is what's the thing you're most excited about happening in your soccer world? You touched on a lot there. Is there anything else that you didn't touch on that you want to mention as far as excitement?
My daughter's going to start at YC
that's great.
In the fall, and I'm super excited about that because it means I don't have to keep her off the field. She gets to be on the field now, and I'm really excited about that. And then just really like we talked about the Champions League, the possibility that we'll have a team in the Champions League is really exciting to me. Not that we need more soccer, because we don't, but I can get on board with more soccer if it's playing in Costa Rica in February for sure. So.
Absolutely. I'll have to convince my wife about the same thing. I'm excited about that. Matt, thank you so much for being with me today. Anyone watching the YouTube video, apologies for this focus issue that's been happening throughout. But we have all of your stuff, your Twitter, the Brotherly Game. I think the Brotherly Game Twitter linked in the video description and podcast show notes. But in case people are just listening, where can they find you online?
At Matt Ralph _TBJ.
All right. And then the Brotherly Game is just brotherlygame.com, right?
Yep.
All right. So make sure to go check out all of Matt's stuff. Matt, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
All right, cool. Listeners and viewers, anyone watching, thank you for tuning in. Apologies again for the focus issues, but this was an awesome conversation, and hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I did. So have a great day, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. See ya.
I was too long-winded.
No.
You can edit.